Hello there. Welcome back. I'm Claire Laughlin, and you're listening to This Leader. So glad you're here. I'm sensitive to words and tone. I guess I always have been. So I've always watched people and paid attention to interpersonal and team dynamics. And here's what I've learned after years of working with leaders. Most of us are so focused on what we're trying to say that at times we're blind to what we're actually communicating. And a lot of the time, what we're communicating through our word choices, our tone, the subtle framing of our sentences could be triggering defensiveness in the other person and maybe even compromising trust. And it's diminishing our ability to build the kind of high trust relationships in which our conversational partners can let their guard down and be vulnerable and share authentically. So today, I want to share a map. It's a simple, practical framework that'll help you see your own communication in a new way, I hope, and make small shifts that have an outsized impact on trust. So back in 1961, a researcher named Jack Gibb published a paper about interpersonal communication that was a game changer for me when I read it in graduate school. But in this paper, Gibb summarized something that I had experienced, something that I had felt and known in so many relationships, but I didn't yet have the specific language for. And it was like a veil had been lifted for me. And once I understood the essence of his framework, things really shifted for me. I was able to see things that I hadn't seen clearly before. And wow, it made such a difference. Jack Gibb had spent years observing and coding how people talk to each other in groups. And what he found was this. Certain kinds of communication reliably trigger defensiveness in other people, and certain other kinds of communication don't. Okay? So he called these patterns supportive or defensive communication climates. And he mapped out 6 pairs of behaviors that create either a supportive or a defensive kind of climate. What is a climate? Let's start there. You can think about the communication climate almost like the weather that you experience in any given relationship. We all kind of know this when we just stop to think about it because we've all experienced it. Some relationships are sunny and bright and warm pretty consistently. Of course, that's not every day, not all the time, but overall, you know when you live in one of these sunny, warm climates, right? We know that when we're with these people in these sunny and warm climates, we feel good. We feel safe, we feel seen, we feel heard and understood. And this is a result of the way that both people communicate in those relationships, okay? You might characterize other relationships as stormy and unpredictable. I know I've been in those. In those situations, we're never quite sure what we're going to get, and it's very hard to be at ease. And in still other relationships, you might feel small or insignificant or undervalued when you compare that to those relationships in which you feel equal and valued. Okay? You know, we feel differently in different relationships. And what Gibb's framework did for me is it tied it back to patterns of communication. There are patterns of communication that contribute to these feelings. So, my friend, if you were wondering, it's probably not just you when you are feeling this way in a relationship. If you find yourself constantly feeling small or vaguely undervalued or like you have to defend yourself all the time, you just might be the recipient of someone else's defensive communication patterns, okay? So I want to be clear about something before we go further. So this defensive or supportive communication patterns, it's like the person communicating is communicating in such a way that creates defensiveness in another or a sense of support in the relationship, okay? And when I say supportive communication, it's not just about being soft and loving and warm and kind all the time. It's not about avoiding hard conversations or sugarcoating difficult truths. I mean, some of the most direct and honest and high accountability communication I've ever seen is very supportive. We're going to unpack this model today, but I just want to demonstrate how you can be supportive but also very clear. So we'll get there, okay? What Gibb is pointing to in this framework is something more subtle. It's the difference between language that makes another person feel judged or controlled or dismissed, for example, and language that makes them feel seen and respected and safe enough to actually hear you. Okay? Because think about it. When people feel defensive, they stop listening. They go into self-protection mode, right? That little part of our brain gets activated and we start thinking, danger, there's something I have to protect here. And your message, no matter how important it is, doesn't land. The relationship also takes a hit. Every defensive communication move is like making a tiny withdrawal from your relationship trust bank account, okay? So today, we're going to look at 4 of Gibb's 6 pairs, and these are 4 I found to be most relevant to leaders. You'll understand these instantly. And for each one, I'm going to give you some examples of what the defensive version might sound like, what the supportive version might sound like, and how small that shift actually is. Because that's something that really surprised me when I first encountered this work. Like the difference between the words you might choose that are going to trigger defensiveness versus the words you choose that create greater trust and support is just a few words, sometimes just one. So the first pair that I want to talk about is evaluation versus description. Evaluative communication is judgmental. It renders a verdict on the other person, okay? It talks about their behavior, their character, their worth in some way. And the thing about evaluative language is that it can feel completely natural to the speaker. I mean, think about it. You're frustrated or something went wrong. You're just naming what you see, right? In your eyes, you're just like, I'm just naming what I think is. But what the other person hears is a small attack on their identity. And then their nervous system responds accordingly. And little walls go up, okay? Little bricks get put in those walls. And here's what evaluative communication might sound like in a leadership context. Like, gosh, you're always late to these meetings. Or that report was sloppy. Or you don't seem to care about this project. Or you're not a team player. So I want you to notice something about those. They might be an accurate reflection of your frustration at the moment, but those statements are about a person. They render a judgment. They sound like an absolute claim, right? They use words like always, or you're not, or you don't, right? And that leaves the other person no room to respond except to defend themselves, okay? You want to leave room for the other person. You want to give those evaluations space. So in evaluative communication, you can actually be evaluative in a positive way as well. And I don't think that has quite the same trust diminishing impact, right? You can say, you are great at this, or you're always so, you know, wonderful to be around, or this or that. And those kinds of evaluations certainly don't diminish trust as much. But I would encourage you to practice, even with positive evaluations, using more descriptive language. So I said it's evaluative versus descriptive. So instead of evaluating and staking a claim, making a judgment, think about using descriptive language. And that descriptive language describes behavior. It describes behavior specifically, hopefully factually, and it often adds something about the speaker's experience. Okay, so it moves from you always or you are to I. Okay, I see, I observe, I believe. Okay, so now I'm talking about me, I'm not talking about you. It moves from judgment to observation and description. So here's what, if you're, frustrated with somebody's behavior or performance, here's what it might sound like in descriptive language. Instead of saying, you're always late to these meetings, you might say something like, I've noticed you've been coming in after we've started the last few weeks. Okay, so that's an I statement. It's something I've noticed, even though it does include you, but I've noticed that you've been coming in after we've started. So that's more descriptive. Late is a judgment. After we've started, I would say that's more like a fact. Like we can measure that. Okay. Late, you can also measure late, but late has an added layer of judgment. Okay. So you might say, I've noticed you've been coming in after we've started the last few weeks. I wanted to check in with you about that. It's an invitation, it's a description, it starts with an I. Okay, so instead of saying something like that report was sloppy, for example, which is very evaluative, you could try something like, there were several sections in the report that needed more detail. Can we talk about how to improve those? So it's about the report. You could start with I noticed if you want, but it doesn't always have to start with I noticed, but trying to get away from the negatively evaluative words and focus more on being descriptive. Okay, so instead of something like, you don't seem to care about this project, you could try, I'm not getting what I need here. I want to understand what's happening. Okay, that's an I statement. Do you hear the difference between those? The content is essentially the same. The concern is the same. The standard is the same. But the first version sort of puts the other person on trial. I'm judging you. The second version is an opener to a conversation. Okay. I can almost promise you that that second version will get you closer to what you ultimately want, which is a change. Okay. So if you want to start catching these in your own language, think about this before you deliver feedback or before you name a problem. Ask yourself, am I describing a behavior or am I judging a person? If the answer is judging, try to rewrite that sentence in your mind. Take the you out of the driver's seat. Put I in its place and get specific about the behavior, not the character. This single shift from evaluation to description is one of the highest leverage communication changes that a leader can make. And it starts with just noticing which one you're doing. All right, the second pair we're going to talk about is control versus problem orientation. Okay, controlling communication versus having a problem orientation. Controlling communication imposes. Like the speaker has already decided what the solution is. Like, I'm going to control the situation. I'm going to control, you to some degree, something like that. I've decided what the solution is, what needs to happen, what the other people involved should do. And the conversation is basically like a command. It's a delivery mechanism for that predetermined conclusion. Okay. The subtext in a controlling communication, like the other part that you're also communicating, is I know better than you do. Your input isn't necessary here. Okay. So here's the thing. A lot of leaders do not experience themselves as controlling. They experience themselves as decisive, efficient, clear. And sometimes that is exactly what's needed. So it's not like this is an all or nothing type of thing, okay? It's not. But when control becomes your default register, like when you're telling people instead of asking across the board, it erodes a little something over time. People stop bringing you their thinking. They stop flagging problems early for you, and they learn, in a sense, that the conversation is more of a formality, so they treat it like one, okay? So I talk about this a lot in my coaching courses because a lot of leaders fall into the trap of, a team member brings you something, they ask you a question, and instead of asking like, okay, well, tell me more, or well, what would you do in this situation, or how do you think we should proceed? They jump in with here's how you do it. Okay, now this does not feel controlling. It feels helpful at the moment, but in a little subtle way, it can be programming your team members to not bring you solutions. Okay, let's kind of go in deeper with some examples here. So here's what controlling communication can sound like. Imagine this. Your manager says, here's what you need to do. Or, I've thought about this and the answer is X. Just execute it. Or, don't overcomplicate it. Do it this way. Or, I've already decided. I just need you to implement. Okay. So, all the subtle ways that we take control. Okay, I don't know. I just have to say this again. This is not about removing this entirely from your language. It's about being conscientious about when you are communicating this way and with whom. This is particularly important in your relationships at home, my friends. Particularly important. But it's really being conscientious about the unintended consequences of the way you might be communicating. So, controlling communication, it's directive, it's sort of command and control. You can think about it that way. Problem-oriented communication, by contrast, when you compare and contrast these two kinds, controlling versus problem-oriented, it treats the conversation as a genuine collaboration. It assumes that the other person has relevant knowledge, perspective, or stakes in the outcome, and it makes room for that. So here's the flip. Instead of saying, here's what you need to do, you might say instead, here's the problem we're trying to solve. What do you think? Or you might even ask, well, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Instead of saying, I've already decided, I just need you to implement, try something like this. Well, I'm leaning toward X, before we go in that direction, what am I missing? You're inviting the person to contribute. Instead of saying, don't overcomplicate it, do it this way, you could try, I want this to be simple to execute. We need a simple solution. What would make this easier? Something like that, right? So again, problem orientation does not mean that you abdicate your authority or you pretend that you don't have a point of view. Neither of those things are true. You can be direct and decisive and still create room for genuine input. The difference is in whether you're inviting collaboration or closing it off, okay? When I'm in my own business and I need to make decisions about things or I feel some urgency about a decision, you can even contextualize it a little bit by saying something like, I'm inclined to make this decision now. Is everybody okay with that? Anything else to say before I decide? Just making sure that you are really taming your advice monster. I love that. Sidebar, Michael Bungay Stanier, he has a great book by this name, Tame Your Advice Monster. I highly recommend it. Anyway, before you give advice or tell someone what to do, just ask for their perspective. Insert a question before you offer the advice. Ask, what do you think? How do you think we should proceed? Or what ideas do you have? What are we missing? Or even when somebody comes to you and they start sharing a problem, just say, would you like my advice? These are all great questions that invite more collaboration and just make you more conscientious of when you're jumping in to that sort of control pattern of telling instead of asking. This is the training ground. This will help you train yourself to pause and involve the other person instead of always jumping in as the expert. Okay, the next pair is indifference versus empathy. And I want to slow down here a little bit because there's a counterfeit version of this that can kind of make things worse. So let's talk about this. When you're indifferent to another person, your indifference signals that the other person's feelings or experience or perspective doesn't matter. It's not always intentional. In fact, most leaders who communicate indifference have no idea they're doing it. It shows up in things like half listening while you're checking your phone or, rushing past someone's concern to get to the solution or responding to their emotion with pure logic or moving on before the other person feels heard. And here's what it sounds like in practice. Something like this. Okay, noted. Moving on now. Right? That's the essence of it. Or, look, I don't have time for this right now. Or that's not what we need to focus on. Or you're being too emotional, right? Even when the words aren't harsh, the message underneath is what you're feeling is inconvenient to me. That message is devastating to trust. I don't know why this one has been particularly meaningful for me because over and over again, especially as a parent, I've wanted to train myself to slow down and tell the other person that they matter. Okay. To be able to say, even when I'm in a hurry, I would love to hear your story. I have to go take a phone call right now, or I'm late for a meeting, or whatever it is. Can we talk about this in a little while? Or how are you doing? Do you need my full attention right now? Something like that. Like, I just have always tried to find ways to demonstrate to the other person, I'm here, I value you. Maybe that's because I tend to move fast and I know that this can be a real blind spot for me. But okay, empathic communication, it does the opposite. It signals to the person that their experience matters and it registers with you, that you're actually present with them and you're not just waiting for your turn to respond, right? So instead of saying, okay, noted, moving on, right? You could say, before we move on, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. It sounds like you're frustrated with how this has been handled, or something like that. So reflection. It's a pause and a reflection. And you're reflecting the person's emotions, their needs. You're taking a positive, good guess at what the person might be, right? So, for example, instead of saying, you're being too emotional, you could say, I can see this matters a lot to you. Help me understand what's underneath that. Okay? Instead of rushing past a person's concern, just pause, just name what you're observing. Like, I feel like I'm noticing some hesitation from you. Am I right? What's happening for you? And it looks like this. It looks like turning to the other person, putting down your phone, letting them finish their sentence before you jump in. Like, finish their sentence and then you reflect back so that you make sure you understand before you jump in. Even better, okay? We need to practice being present with others and trying to understand the world from their perspective first, even when we're busy. But this is the one I really want to talk about, a counterfeit behavior here. So a counterfeit is something that looks a lot the same, but it's not. Leaders who aren't already prone to empathy, for example, or when they first encounter empathy as a core communication skill and they think to themselves, oh yeah, I want to do this. They try it on like a new outfit and it doesn't quite fit right just yet. And that is true for us when we're learning almost anything. But sometimes we end up doing something that looks like empathy, but it's not. We use the words without the intention, saying, I hear you, while you're clearly not listening, or reflecting back what someone says in a way that like parrots them or feels mechanical or like they're running a script. That is hard. People feel that. Counterfeit empathy, it can feel worse than no empathy at all because it signals that you're supposed to care, but you don't. And so the trust violation is sort of doubled there. So what do you do when you're in the learning zone? You're trying to build this skill, but it still feels awkward and unnatural. Two things. First, just slow down. Genuine empathy requires you to pause and register what the other person is experiencing. You can't rush it. If you find yourself moving too fast, that's usually the signal that you're performing rather than really connecting. So slow down and really try to be with what the other person is saying. And when you're in doubt, ask a question. Okay. So instead of saying, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated, which can feel very formulaic, try, what's this like for you? Or what do you need from me right now? Like a genuine question, it's harder to fake, but it does magic. A genuine question. So next time someone brings you a problem, resist the urge to solve it for the first 60 seconds. Just listen. Then reflect one thing you heard or clarify or dig deeper and try to understand before you move to solutions. Just do one little thing. That's the whole exercise. Okay, the fourth pair I'm going to talk about is one that I feel is really undernamed, let's say, in leadership conversation, and it's certainty versus provisionalism. These are Gibb's words, certainty versus provisionalism. But think about it this way. Certainty in communication means you've already arrived at the answer. New information, not going to change that. Okay? It communicates, without saying so explicitly, that your mind is closed. We are closed for business. The conversation is a formality. So certainty isn't always a bad thing, Decisive leaders who can cut through ambiguity are very valuable. And when a decision has been explored and vetted, and you've involved the right people and you're ready to decide, then go for it. But when certainty becomes your default posture, like when you're the person in the room who's never wrong, never uncertain, never open to being surprised, never open to changing your opinion, this does not invite trust and equality in a relationship. It shuts something down in the people around you. They stop bringing you new thinking. Why would they? They know you're not going to change your mind, right? They stop challenging your assumptions. Why would they? You're not open to challenging your assumptions. Why should they? And over time, you end up in an echo chamber of your own making. Okay? Think about that. What leaders do you know that are truly successful that live in an echo chamber? Like almost none. We think of leadership as people who are learning and growing and out on the edge. And that's because they are open-minded and thinking differently about things. Like, have you ever known someone who forms an opinion about something and they stay firm in that opinion no matter what new information is presented? I know I have, and I could tell you some stories there. Here's what certainty sounds like. Something like this. I've been doing this for 20 years, trust me. Or that's not going to work. Or we tried that before, it failed. Or I already know what the problem is, right? Or also global statements. When you hear people making global statements, all of these people are like this, or it's always like this every time, or something like that. This reflects a mind that is closed. All right? Because think about it. When you combine certainty with an evaluative lens that conveys superiority, oh man, certainty plus superiority, that creates quite a toxic cocktail, my friends. Like, what does this sound like? Again, those global, sweeping, unchangeable judgments. Like, so and so's just lazy. You can't convince me otherwise. Or some generation, pick one. Oh, they're so this or that. They're so entitled. They're so behind the times. Do we hear these things all the time? Honestly, I mean, I hate even kind of drumming up examples. You know these examples, but I don't even want to say these things out loud because I believe that this kind of certainty and evaluation and judgment is slowly destroying relationships. I know it is. And I know that you hear these things. I promise you. Now that you're attuned to it, if you kind of tune your radar into this, you are going to hear it everywhere, everywhere. So be on the alert. And instead, try to choose what Gibb calls provisional communication, right? This is communication that holds conclusions lightly. It reflects that you are genuinely open to being wrong. And it models something really important for the people around you. And that is that intellectual humility is a strength, not a weakness. So here's the flip. Instead of saying something like, that's not going to work, you could try, okay, I'm skeptical about that approach, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay? I'm skeptical, but maybe I'm wrong. Or instead of saying, I already know what the problem is, you can say, I have a strong hypothesis about what's happening here. Can I run this by you? Or let me test my assumptions with you. Okay. Instead of, we tried that before and it failed, try something like, okay, we've tried that before. It didn't land. What could we do differently this time? Okay. So you're catching yourself and you're thinking in your mind, okay, I tend to think X, Y, or Z, and I'm pretty solid on that, but I need to be open to new ideas. Or I've been judgmental about that in the past. Where are my opportunities to change my mind? Provisional language still lets you have a point of view. You're not pretending to be a blank slate. You're saying, okay, here's where I am now, but I'm genuinely open to change. And that's different from performing openness when you're actually closed. Okay, so pretending to be open to ideas. We've all been in these situations. The counterfeit of provisionalism, it's false curiosity. It sounds like asking questions, but you've already decided the answer. Okay, it's like leading the witness questions. It sounds like, what do you think? But you're not listening to the response. Trust me, people in your organization, they know when you're doing this, and it can be very corrosive. You may as well just state your conclusion outright, because when you pretend, it adds a layer of manipulation on top of the control. The real version of provisionalism requires that you're actually willing to change your mind. And if you're not, if you've genuinely already decided, then just own it. Just say, I've made this call and here's why. It's honest, it's direct, and it builds more trust than fake curiosity. But here's my request for you. Check your certainty. Remember that the future is yet to be seen and new information is always emerging. And we tend to see what we believe we will see. So when you open your mind, amazing things can happen. I really want to end here by talking about how to catch yourself. So now you have 4 pairs: evaluation versus description, control versus problem orientation, indifference versus empathy, and certainty versus provisionalism. So here's how I want you to start using this. Just tune in. Start paying attention to your language and other people's language, because sometimes we can catch things in other people. And what we want to do is, instead of judging them for it, we want to turn it around, put the mirror up and be like, ooh, wow, how do I do that? It's easy to hear it in others sometimes, because you want to think about the moments that you get triggered and you feel defensive, and then kind of rewind the clock a little bit and be like, what just happened there? And you know what? Understanding the pairs, it was helpful for me. It might not be helpful for you. Like, you don't have to memorize all the names. What you have to tune into is, where is someone evaluating you? You know, where are they not tuned into your feelings? Where are they being certain or superior, right? These kinds of things. And then dial it back. Okay. So again, start paying attention to these situations. Start paying attention to how you feel in company of others. Start paying attention to your own language. And maybe even more important, pay attention to your beliefs. Where are your fixed beliefs? Where do you have these unwavering beliefs, and about whom and in what situations? Because those beliefs, they filter into your language. And then notice, what words am I using that are demonstrating my beliefs? And then make some shifts. Add in some questions. Pause, slow down. Use more I language. Practice describing instead of evaluating. Make room for being wrong, you know? Like, we tend to get so fixed in our beliefs, and we need to practice open-mindedness. When you're about to start a sentence with you, pause, turn around. Try speaking that using an I statement. What's true about me instead of what's true about you, right? Ask a question. Again, pause, be present. These are general tips, and it may seem like a long list, but I promise you, the quality of your relationships will reflect your effort. You will benefit from this practice. And this is the thing that I believe, I don't know him, but I believe that Gibb understood about how sometimes the essence of this model gets lost when people reduce it to a list of tips or to memorizing pairings or something like that. It's not so much about techniques. It's about signals, okay? You are sending signals with your communication, with your body language, your tone, your words. And those signals add up to the climate. You are shaping the emotional climate of your relationship. And over time, you're either building trust and supportiveness and connectedness, or you're diminishing it. The people that I admire the most have internalized this, not as a communication strategy, but as a way of being with others. They've made a choice about what kind of person they want to be in hard conversations. They've made a choice about how they want the people around them to feel in their presence. And that choice shows up in every sentence, in your words, in your tone, in your ability to be present with others. Okay? So that's it for today. As always, thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll share this with a friend, practice it at home, and until next week, go lead the way.